I love the Feywild. The eerie, slightly alien atmosphere of this magical realm has intrigued me since I first read about it when I picked up the Dungeon Master's Guide. The idea of stumbling into a realm of fairies and twisted revelries while you're going for a walk through the forest, it provides a sense of randomness and immediacy. It's exciting and scary, and I wish the Feywild got a little more love in 5e than it does. The setting doesn't seem as fleshed out as some of the others, and the Feywild specific creatures available to us through the monster manual seem rather limited. So I've decided to make a video where I show you guys how I add and adapt monsters to the roster of creatures found in the Feywild. Hi, I'm Johan, and today I'll be talking about how to use creatures that aren't Feywild native in the Feywild. This video will have 3 parts to it. Part 1 is understanding the Feywild, where I'll do a quick primer. Part 2 is porting and adapting creatures. Part 3 is homebrewing. Timestamps for these parts will be in the description. Part 1, understanding the Feywild. So here's a quick primer to the Feywild. It's a fairy tale land. Think Arthurian legend and Celtic mythology. Think Eastern European Baba Yaga. Think Norse myths. This is where you'll find elves in place of humans, and you'll have Eladrin as well. You'll have the Archfey, you'll have the fairies, you'll have your goblins here and there even. This is the place where kids dream of being shipped off to until they do. It's a place of adventure, but it's also a place of immense danger. Coming into the Feywild is like going into the most beautiful, lush forest you've ever seen. Everything is intense. It smells nice, nicer than any flower garden you've ever been in. The light, the way it comes through the leaves in the trees above, it's like a kaleidoscope. And the sounds of the birds and the nature is heartwarming, to say the least. This is a place that's absolutely charming. In fact, it might even be enchanting. Because if you eat the food, or if you drink the water, or if you take a dance with one of the inhabitants, you might be enchanted and stuck here forever, unable to leave and go back into the prime material realm. Because going into the Feywild, you've crossed over into a realm that is next to parallel dimension, next to the prime material realm, where the main adventure is likely to take place. This is a fun detour for many dungeon masters, or it can be a campaign setting in and of itself. It can be a place where your characters go to in order to find a particularly powerful artifact, say a magical bow that can shoot a would-be god, or it can be a place where you might have been a little tired of sending people into the elemental planes, which I don't know why you would, but it can be an alternative to that, or an alternative to going to the abyss or into the Nine Hells. Settings that are more fleshed out, all of them really, than the Feywild. And something that's really nice about the Feywild, even though I also kind of hate it, is the fact that it is not very fleshed out. It gives you as a dungeon master so much more room to breathe and so much more room to play with what you have and to homebrew with what you don't have than many of the other settings do. Now, this is a double-edged sword in that this freedom kind of comes at the expense of you not really knowing where to go with all the freedom. You have so many choices and so little to go on that it becomes like that it feels like you're fumbling in the dark. Something to keep in mind when you adapt and port creatures is what fits to this place. This is a place of bargains that cannot be broken. if something fun to do is to ask a player for their name. Say, hello, can I have your name? They say, hi, I'm Johan. And suddenly they can't say their name anymore because it belongs to someone else. Creatures here are fickle, and everything runs on high emotions. If someone is sad, then they might themselves turn into something entirely different, depending on how you as the Dungeon Master decide to run the place. Or a particularly powerful Fey creature, like an Archfey, who's sorrowful, can turn a glade of beautiful, lush apple trees into a barren wasteland of frozen, snow-covered crags. This is a place that is malleable. Everything is in constant flux, but the creatures are somehow a little bit perpetual. Can't really kill a Fey. Depending on how you run it, you might be able to kill someone, or not. Maybe you kill a Fey, it comes back, it reforms after a while, and it has it out for you for the rest of your life and beyond. Anyway, that's sort of your primer to the Feywild, which, speaking of the creatures, brings us to the second part of the video. Part 2, porting and adapting creatures and lore. So, something that always bothered me about the Feywild is, and the Fey creatures and the things that are linked to that, is the fairy dragon. It has fairy in the name, but if you look at the type, you can see it on page 133 of the Monster Manual. They aren't Fey. Why are they not Fey? It's so obvious. They're trickster creatures with little wings, and it just makes me want to tear my hair out. But no, they aren't. A little fix you can do to just adapt and port that creature over is add the Fey tag, or don't. It doesn't really need any adaptation. It's just something you can grab from the Monsters Manual and the Prime Material plane and boop, put right into the Feywild. That's something that's pretty easy to do in porting over creatures from the Prime Material realm or from any other realm. Is just say, what would I think fits here? Do I have to adapt anything at all? Not really. I can just use this, even though it doesn't really appear in the Monster Manual that I can. In fact, looking through the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Monster Manual, Volo's Guide, Sanathar's Guide, there's like blocks of what creatures you can encounter in different environments, like, say, an arboreal environment, which, yeah, look at those. But also, go out of your way to look at other things. Say there's a certain celestial creature that I think belongs in the Feywild instead of the outer Godeline Plains. The unicorn somehow is found. It's somehow a celestial that's not native to the Feywild, despite the myth of the unicorn being very much in line with what the Feywild is. It's dangerous as hell, but it's so beautiful. It can only be tamed by a virgin, according to legend. And if you piss it off, it's going to maul you. But it is the most pretty horse you'll ever see. Something else that could fit, and that's a different type of adaptation, is bullywogs. Which you might think, okay. Bullywogs are like a different twist on the goblin in my book. They are largely swamp dwelling, and they have this cute little thing where they have a very strict pecking order, and they like to keep captives, and they like to be evil for the sake of evil, so they are like little malicious sprites. But I think they fit. I think they make the fit because having a swamp area that's infested with these things, that they go out and attack other communities of Fae and bring them back and then torture them. They might have a little cage with a fairy in it, and they'll poke at it with a stick for hours on end. And I think that very mischievous nature and that very evil nature of them, it fits well within the Feywild, because things in the Feywild aren't always mischievous, they're also evil. But they can definitely be good. We're talking about stuff that you can fight here. They will fight you for the sake of capturing you. I think you could fit them into the Feywild with a green hag. Say, looking at the Monsters Manual, hags have all been exiled from the Feywild, which I think is cool in the lore, but seeing as we have a very limited number of creatures that we can actually put in the Feywild, or we don't, talking about, adaptation, but they give us a very limited amount of creatures we can use in the Feywild. The hag fits very well. Just put a green hag into a swamp, have her rule over a bunch of these toad creatures, and boom, you've got a level 1, 2, perhaps 3 starting adventure for a group of adventurers that went into the Feywild. Now, for something where you really have to adapt a lot, blights. Here, you don't really have to change anything on the stat block, but you have to change things in the lore. Blights, found on page 31 in the Monsters Manual, are descendants of a vampire tree, which I find personally to be very limiting in their use. However, if you use them as a creature and them as a stat block, them as their whole atmosphere and their sort of impact on the players and the nature around them, you can bring those into the Feywild and say these are part of a corrupted forest, or these are nature spirits that you have angered by hunting in their woods, or simply by being outsiders going into what they consider their domain or their holy or special site. Maybe you walked into a shrine and you grabbed something that you should not have grabbed. Maybe you stepped on an acorn which housed the last remaining spirit of an ancient oak, that the acorn was supposed to go into the ground and become a big tree again, but you stepping on it broke it, and now it can't become what it was destined to be. And so the forest comes at you with all its fury and all the blights. So you can have a few blights for a lower level thing, but if this happens at the higher levels, send a damned horde of blights at your players. Have them come up from the mud, have vines sort of sling around the ankles of your players. Suddenly they turn around and there's 5 gnarled thorn creatures of wood and evil and malice coming out at you with these long gnarled clawed hands. That's terrifying, but also in line with this evil wood vibe that you can adapt for the Feywild. Now, for part 3, what do you do when you don't have a stat block? What do you do when you don't have a creature in any of the books that you want in there? Say, I can't find the Kelpie, for example, in any of the 5e books. There's no stat block for it. There's no lore for it in any of the 5e. But it's a wondrous creature, and it fits so damn well. So, you homebrew. And that's what part 3 is about. Homebrewing a stat block can be very hard doing from scratch. So I'm going to give you a very easy tip. Find another stat block that sort of does what you want. For me, given that the Kelpie is sort of a horse spirit, I take the warhorse and I make some modifications to it. The warhorse can be found on page 340 in the Monster's Manual. Okay, so some background. The Kelpie is an evil water spirit that dwells in ponds. Depending on what culture you're looking at, it can be one creature in one pond, or it could be a lot of similar creatures in a lot of ponds. Where I'm from, there isn't just one, there are multiple. So you might come across this more than once, or you can throw it at your players just the once. And I think you should do it just the once. And here's why. There's an element of surprise to this creature, and you can't really fool your players twice. Unless they're really careless. The Kelpie is a shape-shifting spirit that lives in ponds and rivers, and it will shapeshift into a beautiful, alluring man or woman, or non-binary, and lure their victim into the water only to drown them. Really just get in there. But in some stories, it turns out it shapeshifts into a horse instead. And I like that. I'm going to go with that. That's why I go for the warhorse stat. It has the whole charged thing, which I think is really, really neat. So we take that stat block. Then we add a few other things, like, say, a bite attack. I'm imagining this horse spirit is something that is carnivorous and hungry. It wants to eat your players. So we give it the bite attack from the warg on page 341. And let's give it some resistances and a swim speed. Maybe it has proficiency at grappling, so we can sort of pick out some stuff from a giant octopus. Why not? 326 in Monster's Manual. So now we have sort of the base stat block. This might not look like much, but it's all about the presentation and all about how you use your creatures when it comes to the Feywild. Because the Feywild has that whole atmospheric thing. You have to present your creature right. And here's how you play the Kelpie. You tell your players that they come across a big clearing. Beautiful meadow with a large, still pond, clear water. There are little lightning bugs or light bugs, depending on what mood you're in as a dungeon master, that fly around above the surface. There are bees. The smell of lavender from a bush fills your nostrils, and grazing in the middle of this beautiful meadow surrounded by big old trees, you see the most majestic horse. Its features are elven in nature. Speaking of just what this place is, it's beautiful, white, almost silvery. It shines in the light, bouncing off its fur, and it comes over slowly closer to you guys, just curious, and it approaches you. And then you point at, say, a fighter who wants to be a cavalier or chevalier, depending on how you pronounce that. And it approaches the character. It looks at the character, and then nuzzles its head against his chest. And say, tell your players that it looks at, it locks eyes with your character with these big pearlescent eyes. Now, a wise player might roll an insight check here, but if your players want a riding animal or a horse and have built their class specifically around that, then they likely won't. It presents its back to you or side to you and lowers itself down so that you might mount it. And the moment that they do that, you have the horse sprint right into the water, and it is not going to stop for anything. That's a surprise round. Say it makes it 20, 40 feet, maybe 60 galloping. Who knows? And then it just gets into the water and it attempts to drown the character. They might try to get off, and they might try to stay on thinking, hey, maybe this is where I have to tame it. No. At one point, it's going to start drowning your characters, or your character that's on the horse. Make a opposed strength check for grappling, and we're going to give the horse, like, say, 18 strength, so it gets 4+, maybe proficiency in grappling, +2, so +6 to the grapple check, to keep your player from getting off its back. And then you just start the drowning mechanics, which I found in, I think it's Player's Handbook, but it could be Dungeon Master's Guide. Drowning mechanics go in, maybe even speed it up a little bit because it's trying to knock the air out of you or something. And that, like, you have this as your one creature, because then that rest of the party has to save your player. And it's not meant to be deadly. It can be, definitely, given the stats I'm going to show you in now. Look at the screen now. Take a screenshot if you want to use this creature. Or don't. But you can always come back and look. Anyway. This creature is not meant to be super deadly. It's meant to be taken out as a one-off creature boss. It should last maybe 3 rounds at most. You can always beef up the HP if your players are like high on DPS. But this is sort of a creature that you would put in very early in the game, because you want to teach your players a lesson about the Feywild, that it might look very beautiful. It might be very alluring or charming, but it wants to hurt you if you're not careful. This place can be a death trap, or it can be the most pleasant thing you've ever experienced. But there are no promises, and nothing looks like it is. Nothing is as it seems. Now, one final thing on respecting source materials. When you adapt a creature or you homebrew a creature, be mindful of where you're taking this creature from, what myth you're going with, and what culture it's from. Try to be respectful of the original intent. Don't just say, hey, I want a horse spirit that drowns people, but we're going to keep the drowning out. It's just a horse spirit that tries to fly off with people. Try to keep it close to the original myth. It's a lot more rewarding, and it's also a lot more respectful to the original culture that came up with it. So try to keep that in mind when you do decide to homebrew stuff. And I think that's going to be it for the end of the video. Just to summarize, I did 3 things here. One, I made a quick intro to the Feywild. I'm going to make a follow-up video where I flesh it out a little bit more. I did a porting and adapting thing for creatures where you already have the stat block and you already have the lore, where you just have to tweak it a little bit. And then I did a homebrew section where I showed you guys how you can homebrew a creature from a myth or a legend into the Feywild. I hope this helped you flesh out your Feywild creatures, and I hope it got you thinking about which monsters you can use to create a more interesting experience for you and your players. I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.